Very good. Am I on? Yeah, all right. Well, welcome everybody to this last breakout session for today. Hopefully you're not too tired. I'll do my best to keep you awake for the next 45 minutes. So, who am I? Well, I'm Christian James, normally go by James, having a good time in München, I think it was last year. And today I would like to tell you a story about a .NET developer's journey into the realms of Sitecore MVC. Now, the grounds of Sitecore MVC can be quite treacherous, so today we will be overcoming many obstacles, we will be crossing many bridges, and there will most definitely be dragons. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our brave .NET developer. One day at work, he is tasked to implement a simple profile page. So he thinks to himself, all right, easy enough. Well, we're going to create a model to contain our data, make a view so we can present the data, and finally a controller so we can bind it all up. But then it occurs to him that, oh, but the data is in Sitecore. We need that. How do you do that? So he asks a colleague, and the colleague is very helpful and tells him, well, the data item you get from the content item from Sitecore. All right, good. Well, how do I get the actual data out from to populate my properties with? Well, there's this field object where you can just pull out the data and copy him over. So, all right, great. On he goes and makes his page, but not quite what he expected it to be. Strange renderings come out, and you know, after a little, he realizes that Sitecore MVC is a very different beast than what he was used to when he was just doing ordinarily Sitecore MVC. So next, well, he thinks, well, he needs to go back to the drawing board and think how he's going to solve this. And he want to do it in a different approach that his colleagues normally do. And one of the criteria that he put up is that he wants to, you know, remove all the repetitive tasks and very time-consuming tasks that he was forced to do with the previous method of doing it. And he wants to do it in a fashion that's familiar to .NET developers. So use a concept that they're aware of already. And lastly, he wants to bring back the concept of the model and have static typing throughout his objects. So with these goals ahead, his newly project was born, called Propeller Mvc. By now you have probably guessed that developer, that it was me. And the project is divided into three pieces. The first piece that we're going to talk about is the core. And what happens in the core? Well, the first thing that we need to do is somehow map the Sitecore items with our code. And normally, we have a few options. We can do it by convention, by just using the name of the field, or we can do a more explicit mapping where we can use the ID. But how did you want to do it with this Propeller core? Well, we definitely want to use explicit IDs because it's much more robust than using names. If somebody renames something in Sitecore, then it stops working. You want to bind it to the actual model. And again, we want to do it in a familiar way that we already know. And lastly, we want to make it extendable. So in the future, if some other requirement came up, we are able to tie new behaviors into the model. So an example of how we would do it normally is the loosely way, by just putting in the name. We could use the ID. That's not very helpful either, because you can't read what you're pulling out. So what most people do is they make a static file with these identifiers. So how should we implement this in the Propeller method? Well, with inspiration from Entity Framework, if any of you have worked with that before, we can create this configuration map, and via generics put in the type that we want to configure. And in the constructor, we can define what property it is that we want to bind, and we can map it to an ID, and we can chain other configurations on top of that. So after that, we need to be able to get the IDs out of the system as well. And normally, if we do it the traditional way, well, we are done. We just use our static file to access these. With the Propeller method, we need to do a little extra work. Luckily, it is kind of done for you, but because the IDs are bound to the properties, we use the metadata on the class to grab these identifiers. And we can do it in a way where we use expressions to achieve the static typing. That was one of our goals. The result of that is the Propeller entity, which has this method called get property ID, and it takes in an expression. And this expression, because you can see the generic input of the class is supposed to be the object itself. So we have an expression of itself, so we can use that to statically type through its own properties, and in return it will get back the ID for us. So a concrete example would look like this. We have a person model with a first name property, and if we wanted to get the ID of that person, we can just call get property, use the expression via static typing, and voila, we have the ID. So to wrap up the core, the first part was configuration. That gave us robust mapping. We had a familiar way of doing it, borrowing a little bit from Entity Framework. It's extendable, so we can bolt on more if we need to. Then we have the entity, which gives us the static typing, and it has this core method that can pull out the ID for us. And yeah, of course, it has a few other common properties that we can that we use quite often, IDs and stuff like that. And the end result is this Propeller entity. The second part of the project is the model part. This is all about extracting the actual data from the item. And again, normally we use the static file to do that. For simple types, we can actually just pull out the raw value and use it straight away. But as we dig into more complex objects, we can't do that any longer. Then we can cast it to one of Sitecore's field types. But this comes with some disadvantages. For once, these field types are not serializable, so we can't put them into JSON directly if we wanted to. And not all properties are always available for us. Sometimes we need this specific property, which is just not available. Yeah, and if we have like a multi-layer nested object graph, it can get really nasty because you're digging further into the object tree, and you're just continuously getting the same item type back every time. With the Propeller method, we're actually ready to go. There is no more work to do. We can use it just as we would in ASP.NET MVC. An example of how we'll go through it the standard way is, you can see here, a simple menu title we can pull out directly. That's no problem. If we wanted to get an image out, the brand image out of the menu item, we can cast it to an image field. And if we wanted to go deeper into the menu structure, we can pull out each sub-menu item by casting it to a reference field. But unfortunately, the work is not done there. We have to then pull out all the data from these items and copy them over to our model. There's a lot of work that you have to do, continue to do all the time. So how can we do that in a more efficient way? Well, with the Propeller method, we just say .title. We've got the title. If we wanted the title of the third layer of the submenu, we can just, dot us all the way to where we want and then grab out the data that we want. If we wanted the brand photo, we can just, pull out the brand photo, and then we have the image field object. Now you might be wondering, it says my image field, and that's because it's not a Sitecore field. This one, this is a custom field that's supported in the framework, and it's used to when we don't have access to everything we need, or if we want to serialize stuff, then we can create our own field types. And some of the problems that we overcome with that is, as I just said, make it serializable, and these custom properties. And the way we do it is that we actually only have to implement one method that sits on an iField adapter. That field or that method has two input parameters. It has the Sitecore item, and it has the identifier to the field that you want to extract. And from there on, you can bolt on any properties that you desire, and then you just go into this method and implement the extraction of the data that you're interested in. And as long as you don't bolt all kind of crazy stuff on it, it will also be serializable. So an example of this would be a general link. Quite often I've seen in projects where people want to get the URL from a general link, because there's so many. It could be internal, it can be media item, it could be internal, and so on. So here, what we're really interested in this case is we want the URL, and we want the description of the URL. And then we could go on implementing all this long switch case of what type it is, and then do the appropriate logic to pull out the URL. So far, all the extraction has been automatically done for you, but of course, I mean, the Propeller method, the Propeller model has some methods to use when it extracts data, and it has one for custom data, it has one for referenced items, and it has, of course, for collections as well. And they look like this. First, we have the Propeller model, and we have this get as. I know it's a little unfortunate naming of the method, but as you all know, naming is the hardest part of our job. And it returns a custom type which implements this interface that we just looked at. And we have a method for the reference items, which again returns a type, the model type that you input. And of course, to get the collections out, we can just grab the list of them. And how would this look in the real world? Well, we just new up model, throw in the current rendering, and then it will automatically figure out which item to grab the data from. And then we can grab a reference items. Here's, you know, the nationality of the person. We can get that out as a model, and the list. And again, we use these expressions to define which property they are coming from. Yeah, and of course we got the custom field as well. Now, every so often we need to inherit there's this, you know, these base properties that are included on all our objects, and we need to be able to pull in. It's not inheritance, but, you know, it's more of a composition that if we want to pull in shared properties to our model, we don't want to map the same fields again and again and again. So one way to get around this was to actually specify shared templates as interfaces, where you can define the properties, and then we can map the interface just as we would map a class, and then we can just implement this interface on a given model, and then we'll automatically get these shared values into the model. So that concludes the entity model, and just a quick recap that it gives us effortless data extraction. It provides custom field types that are very easy to implement, and it supports composition, and it also provides very easy traversing down the object tree to grab whatever data we want to or we need. Use cases for the entity model are typically modern front end. Quite often our front-end developers come to me and ask, you know, we just want this URL for the picture, or we just want to, you know, can you just output it in a raw data in a blob on the site. And that's where this is really useful. And of course also, if you want to make a service, this is pretty much, you know, you just include it, make your models, throw it into a JSON serializer, and off it goes, and you have the complete object tree to send out. And then, of course, also, whenever you have some domain logic where you need to work with the raw values, it's also useful. And the end result, well, is the Propeller method. The only method that I haven't shown here is the include raw values, and that's just a method that the internal configurations call to extract all the data. The last part of the framework is the presentation framework, and this is used for when we need to render it out as HTML. So far, we've only been pulling out the raw data, and the view model sits as the model in the razor view. Of course, it inherits from Propeller methods, so it gives us the functionality from that as well. If we quickly look how we would render out normally without this, I mean, we use the Sitecore helper function, where we can use our static file to point out which field we want to render. It gets a little more complicated or cumbersome if we want to access reference items. Then we need to get that item, pull it out, cast it, and get the target item and throw that into the mix of the helper method to render that out. And again, if we want to iterate over a collection of stuff, we need to cast it to, for instance, a multi-list field and iterate through that, and then do the same kind of thing. Now, the pros and cons of doing it this way is that the Sitecore helper function is very simple to use, at least for simple types. It supports the experience editor, so that's good news. The downside to it is that it kind of limits our control, because there's only this way of rendering it. And the concept of the model is kind of gone out the window, because it's just this Sitecore item where you throw in identifiers. And as we've talked about, reference items can be very messy, especially if it's multi-level deep. With the view model, we can leverage the flexibility of the Propeller model, and we can do fine-grained rendering, where we can just take the data that we've already seen and put it in HTML. And that way we can pretty much make whatever rendering we want, and especially the front-enders are very happy for this, because it gives them the freedom of control that they want. But of course, there's one big disadvantage to this approach, and that is the experience editor. It instantly throws a blocker in, because a lot of the time we have to support the experience editor. Now, to solve this problem, Sitecore provides us this magic wand, which the Sitecore helper method also uses, and it's the field renderer. We can just throw in the item and the identifier, and it will automatically render out HTML for us and switch between when it's in edit mode and when it's not. So we can just, instead of reinventing the wheel, and it seems to be very complicated as well with all the things that it pulls out and adds, especially to the experience editor. So we can just use that into the view. So we're just basically using Sitecore functionality. One of the upsides to this is that if we want to do only HTML rendering, the framework actually doesn't need to pull out or extract all the data, because it can purely work on the metadata from the view model and just pull out IDs. And if it needs to go down the object tree, it just needs to go down, grab the reference Sitecore item, and then again it has access to the metadata on the class, which again provides the identifiers. Yeah, kind of what I just said. And the result is this render method that wraps the Sitecore functionality. How will this look? Well, we'll just say model render, and again use the expression to identify the property that we're going to render out. We can use the methods from earlier on to grab reference items, and of course, because they are view models themselves, we can call render on them, and so on. With collections, we can just grab the list, iterate over that, and again call rendering method on those. The next thing that's very useful when we're rendering out HTML is templates. Now, these templates are just ordinarily ASP.NET MVC helper methods, and they're especially useful for recursive rendering, but we can actually also use them to our advantages and kind of beat the experience editor by combining raw data with these templates, which gives us a way of switching between renderings. A template looks like this, and here we have, in this example, we have a menu item where we're going to do recursive rendering, where we just call ourselves again and can, the classic example is this menu structure where we can just render out as deep as it is. And then we just call it and throw in the model, and off we go. Now to do this trick where we can actually have fine-grained control of the rendering and still support the experience editor. Maybe we can take an example here, make a custom anchor tag in the experience editor. That's a use case that comes up quite often for me. A general link. And the front-enders, they want to not just print out the link. I mean, obviously, the Sitecore method provides us a way to put in attributes, but it's not always enough. In this example, they want to have an icon inside the anchor tag. So they just want the raw data, and then they can sprinkle that in wherever they want. So to achieve this, they can just define a template where they want it to, and where they can create it to look what they want it to look for the user. And then they just call this model template and provide the template and grab the item that they want to render out. And internally, this template method will detect if it's in edit mode or not. And when it's in edit mode, it will use the template for, it will use the render field to render out the general link. And when it's not, then it will use the template that they defined to render out this custom presentation of the link. And yeah, that kind of wraps up the view model. Quickly recap, rendering fields use the existing logic from Sitecore. We can render raw data, and we can leverage template. Oh, sorry, it's a bit quick. We can leverage templating to do custom rendering and still support the experience editor. So I think it's time to a live demo. So we'll be crossing our fingers that everything goes all right. Let's see if we can. It's a little bit laggy here. Well, it's not much of a live demo. It's more of just showing you that this is a real thing and not just stuff that I'm making up here. For instance, let's take an example with this image. Oh my God, it's laggy. Yeah, of course, the debugger arrived on my screen. And we can see, we need to zoom in. You can see this is a typical requirement from our front-enders, that they want to set the image as a CSS property instead of an image tag. So here we can provide them with the custom template where they can render it out as they feel like. And if we close this, and in the experience editor, let's see. Yeah, it's not such a powerful machine. This 8 GB for Sitecore and fully fledged SQL server is a little ambitious. Yeah, taking a little long, but it is editable in the experience editor, and the same with the vehicle link slave one. If we take a look over here, they have put in an icon, and that is not rendered in the page edit because it's using the normal rendering engine. So, just a little backup. Yeah, well, I kind of needed a little bit of the backup. I mean, it's here, I was just showing that it is editable in the experience editor. So to wrap up, or a quick resume of the framework, we had the core part, which takes care of doing all the mapping between Sitecore and code. And it provides us with common properties that we usually want access to: ID, URL, display name, stuff like that. And it provides us the static typing, which is one of the big takeaways from this, is that you can statically type your way through down the object tree and know explicit what kind of object model you have now at this level. The model extracts all the data for us. It provides an easy way to reference items, and it provides us a way of doing custom. It provides us a way of doing custom objects or field objects if we have requirements that are outside of the possibilities of what Sitecore provides us with. And finally, we have the presentation layer, which was all about rendering out HTML. Again, here we use the static typing, so we can get the field that we want to render out. And we have the templating, where we can switch between custom renderings and supporting the experience editor. All this is wrapped up in a project, again, called Propeller Mvc. It's on GitHub. It's open source. Any suggestions, ideas are very much welcome. Hopefully you find it just a little bit interesting. And of course, they're also available as NuGet packages, so it's actually quite easy to use. It's just grabbing the NuGet package, and there's a little initialized processor that you just need to make sure that it's copied over to your Sitecore, the web instance, and then it will pick everything up from there and do the work for you. And then there's just left to say thank you for your interest.
Are there any questions? Somebody's got a question for Christian?
You showed automatic mapping for the fields to your model. How do you deal with fields with special characters in them or spaces? They cannot be mapped to a property of a model.
The properties that have special what?
Special characters or spaces in the field names in Sitecore.
Well, it doesn't rely on any names. It's tightly coupled with the ID of the fields, so you can call it anything you want, and that's also one of the reasons why I don't like the naming convention, because it would be even more easier to do this kind of stuff if we could just use convention. Then we didn't need, because when the site starts up, it goes through your DLLs and looks for these configuration files and pulls out all these IDs. All that we could leave out if we use conventions, because then we could just use the name of the properties and map that over. But that's a little bit fragile, because as soon as somebody starts renaming, then it falls apart. So it's definitely worthwhile doing the little extra work and tightly binding it up to the ID, because you're guaranteed that is not going to change unless they delete the template.
Thank you.
So you do not rely on any type of code generation, am I right saying that? You don't do any code generation?
There's no code generation, and I'm glad you asked, because
that's the next part of my question.
Yeah, because and I have discussed it with some colleagues of mine before, and I mean, more and more people are using the T4 templating together with Unicorn, and that's like an excellent way of auto-generating models and static files for IDs. But in this case, with the way that I've made it, would mean that any changes to Sitecore would actually also change your model, your code, and that I'm not entirely sure that I'm happy with. I would like to. I'm kind of a code-first approach methodology that I want to run with. So, but at least you could do it a little easier by generating this static file with IDs and putting it in the same namespace as the config namespace. And then when you do the configuration, you basically you must have the static files right in front of you, that you just need to plop them in. But it's a thing that I'm still thinking about, how to solve that problem, because I'm not quite ready to let the Sitecore templates generate the models. But who knows? Maybe I change mind someday.
When we're working with code generation, there are two major advantages. Advantage number one is very rapid development. So you don't need to spend time on all that. Second is that if you, let's say, change something in Sitecore, it will break on compile time. So how do you sort this out?
Very valid arguments there, and it is also. I mean, I have colleagues that have suggested that and wanted to do that. I guess it's just. I'm still hanging on to that code first approach, but if somehow the IDs doesn't match up, well then it will print out. I mean, it will fail gracefully. Then you'll just not get anything out, but it will print out an error in the log. And I've had ideas that that I could make some. Either print the errors out in the console in the browser, or make some pretty boxes under saying, this did not match up, you should take a look at it. That's further work that needs to be done, but it's definitely something that I've thought about. That would be really nice. Yeah, I mean, yeah, true.
Any more questions? No? Then a big thanks. So now finally we have a break, I guess. Do we have a break? Yeah.